Hello everyone and welcome back. I was not expecting to make another YouTube video so soon, so I don't really have time for a proper sit-down discussion, but I do have time to put something brief together for my new YouTube channel. So I might as well do that while the topic is fresh. For anyone who's been living under a rock, an individual named Cole Allen recently tried to shoot up the Whitehouse press conference that would have happened last night. He walked in with a shotgun, lit off 8 to 10 rounds, hit a Secret Service member, as I understand it, who was wearing a bulletproof vest, obviously, and shotguns aren't so good against armor. With that said, I think what's a lot more interesting is to dive into Cole Allen's background. Now, Cole Allen is supposedly associated with some left-wing groups, having attended a No Kings protest here or there, and apparently a member of a group called the Wide Awakes, which sounds leftist, but I don't know for sure. I'm going to assume so for the time being. What I find particularly interesting is that Cole Allen was not on the FBI's radar. They had no idea something like this was coming. He had a Bachelor's of Science in Mechanical Engineering, and he had a Master's degree in Computer Science. He is also a self-described, quote, independent video game developer, and he published a game back in 2018 on Steam. That was 8 years ago, by the way. For those of you who are going to feel old now, that was almost a decade ago. Since then, he appears to have been bouncing around between various jobs, acting as a tutor, teacher of the month, that kind of thing. In general, one would describe his employment background as relatively insignificant, especially for somebody with a master's degree. He spent 6 years in university getting a master's degree and has very little to show for it except for student loans, in all likelihood. I don't know the guy. And what I want to dive into a little bit is that I find it likely incidents like these are going to keep happening. Not because I promote violence, obviously, but because a large number of political ideologies do so when they don't see a better option, and people with nothing to lose have a tendency to tie themselves to those political ideologies. As far as we can tell, Cole Allen was single, didn't have a family, like I said, 31 years old, master's degree, and couldn't find a job, or at least not one that one would see as, quote, gainful employment. And his story speaks to a lot of people in the United States right now. A lot of younger people in their 30s and early 20s and late 20s are having an incredibly difficult time forming a career. Now, you can blame the boomers, you can blame the economy, you can blame the billionaires. Regardless, everybody's going to blame someone. Even if that blame is misplaced, they're going to blame someone. And people can complain about polarization all day, but when you get down to it, it's the economy. Now, as a solidly right-wing extreme individual myself, I of course despise the left and the progressives and everything about them. But this guy in particular, I can kind of see where he's coming from based on his background. I've said multiple times to various people that I've met, and I've said, I believe online at least a couple of times, that there is a very finite number of people who can be both skilled chemical engineers and unemployed in your country at any given time. And that holds true for a number of disciplines, but especially chemical engineers. And that's because if somebody put 10, 8, 6 years into school and into developing a skill set at great expense to themselves in terms of both opportunity cost and actual financial cost, it's very uncomfortable for that person to remain unemployed, especially if they, quote, did everything right. They will feel as if the social contract has been violated. And, spoiler alert, it kind of has. And some of those people are relatively harmless. You know, people who get degrees in art history or creative writing or mathematics. Those people tend to be relatively harmless if left unemployed and to their own devices, despite their resentfulness towards the larger society. Now, this guy was mechanical engineering and computer science. The computer science, less dangerous than the mechanical engineering, but the mechanical engineering not that dangerous either. If we cannot fix the economy and we cannot improve the cost of living crisis, eventually one of these guys is going to pop off who has a master's degree or a PhD in chemistry, like energetic chemistry, and that person is going to cause Timothy McVeigh levels of damage because that person is not stupid. They're also very likely to attack infrastructure instead of attacking a White House press briefing, but it really depends on whatever their motives are at the time. We need to get our shit together as a society, and the younger people are not having it. They're tired of having their futures pilfered by older generations, and they're tired of gerontocrats in their 80s trying to decide how the rest of us should live. These people were alive before the moon landings. Most of these people were in their 20s during the moon landings, and yet they're still running the country, and just about everyone has had enough. Now, you can argue about universal basic income, socialist policies versus sort of free capital policies. Honestly, at this point, it's very difficult to argue for free capital policies, not because not because capitalism itself is inherently flawed, but because the way in which it's been implemented, especially across the West at this time, where you have a hegemony of powerful monopolies, is simply ineffective for maximizing the return of the free market. The free market functionally doesn't exist, and functionally never really has. And even if you had a purely free market, it would be days or hours before a sufficient quantity of capital was accumulated for those individuals controlling those companies and for the managerial class controlling those companies to attempt to lobby on their own behalf. Pure capitalism also tends to assume perfect information, that is to say, that the consumer is aware that one product is better than another, while billions and billions are being spent on minimizing the capability of the end user to accurately verify the quality of the product that they have or the quality of the product they intend to purchase. That's basically what all of advertising is, and it's one of the most valuable industries on the planet. So the problem here is not that some dude attempted to shoot up a White House press briefing, although the security clearly needs to be bumped up if we're to keep them safe, which I debatably support at this time. But the fundamental problem is that we have a cost of living crisis, and now we're seeing people with master's degrees show up to try and shoot up a White House press conference. I found this particular guy more interesting than sort of the Luigi Mangione case, and I found him more interesting than the warehouse Luigi, as you call him, as he's been called. All they had to do was pay us enough to live. Yeah, but they're not going to. They're not going to pay you enough to live because they don't care and because their 401k is completely divorced from the Main Street realities of an unproductive workforce. They're all just shuffling money around and hoping something magical pops out the other side. That's what the AI race really is. They're trying to race to the finish in the hopes that something will be there to save the current economic model. I've done a number of articles on the broken economic model on Substack, so check the links below, please, and I will hopefully give you something worth reading. For the time being, though, I get where he's coming from. I don't support it. I'm not really happy about it, but there's a fundamental disconnect when you consistently have people with a high degree of hard sciences, hard engineering, high skill background, incapable of finding gainful employment. And eventually, we will hit that critical threshold, whatever it is, of unemployed, energetic chemical engineers. And I'd really prefer that we didn't. So that's my 2 cents on this shooting, and hopefully I can get some art to go along with this video. So I'll make you a deal. You guys subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I will post a smiley face on Substack for you. Sound good? Thanks.